Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the dim glow of Edo, Japan, where the air smells of rice wine, wet wood, and faint candle smoke. Outside, the streets glisten after evening rain, and paper lanterns sway like tired stars. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, settle in, because tonight we're exploring a world where honor met intoxication and getting drunk could be an art form. You hear laughter first, low, rhythmic, softened by distance. Through the sliding doors of a small izakaya, men in silk robes and peasants in straw hats sit shoulder to shoulder. Their cheeks are flushed, their eyes glassy with sake and stories. The room hums like a heartbeat, filled with clinking cups and the faint strum of a shamisen in the corner. Someone pours for someone else, because in samurai Japan, you never pour your own drink. That, they said, was for the lonely. The sake itself glows like captured moonlight, warm in small ceramic cups. It smells faintly of rice and rain, sweet at first, then sharp, then soft again. Each sip is slower than the one before, as if the drink itself demands contemplation. And it does. For in Japan's feudal age, alcohol wasn't just a pleasure, it was ritual, escape, confession, and rebellion, all filtered through the gentle haze of fermented rice. Tonight, you'll wander through taverns that once echoed with secret poetry, through temples where monks brewed divine spirits in silence, and through battlefields where sake was shared before death. You'll see how the same drink that bonded samurai in loyalty also unraveled them in sorrow. And as the night deepens, you'll find that the story of how Japan got drunk is really the story of how it learned to endure. So sit back, breathe slowly, and let the candlelight flicker across your mind. The cups are small, the night is long, and the sake, like history itself, is stronger than it looks. The story of intoxication in samurai Japan starts not in the taverns, but in the paddies. You can almost smell it, that wet, mineral scent of flooded fields stretching like mirrors beneath a grey dawn. Farmers bend low, their reflections rippling in the water. The mud is cold between their toes, the air thick with the buzz of insects. Rice isn't just food here, it's life, currency, and faith. Every grain that grows will one day feed a soldier, a god, or a ghost. When the wind passes over the paddies, it sounds like soft applause, a living ocean of stalks swaying in rhythm. This sound was the heartbeat of the country. Entire villages timed their lives to it, praying for the perfect balance of rain and sun. The rice that failed meant hunger. The rice that thrived meant sake, and sake meant survival of a different kind. The Japanese called it breathing grain because once fermented, it seemed to inhale life again. Fermentation was seen as both science and sorcery. Monks in temple breweries treated it like meditation, whispering sutras over vats of steamed rice as if the yeast could hear. They believed the gods lived inside the bubbles, sleeping between the grains. When the brew hissed softly, it wasn't just gas escaping, it was divinity waking up. The scent of fermenting rice, sweet, warm, faintly sour, became the smell of creation itself. You picture it, heavy wooden vats arranged like altars, the air humid and alive. Men in white robes walk barefoot, stirring the liquid with long poles, chanting in time. The floor is slick with condensation, the light is filtered through rice paper, pale and forgiving. If you breathe deeply enough, you can almost taste the transformation. Water into spirit, grain into laughter, effort into surrender. Why did it matter so much? Because sake blurred the lines between worlds. It was poured for ancestors, for gods, for guests, for lovers. It turned ritual into pleasure and pleasure into prayer. It let farmers forget the mud, monks forget silence, and samurai forget the weight of duty. In a land obsessed with control, this was the one approved way to lose it, gracefully, beautifully, without shame. The earliest sack was thick, unfiltered, almost chewy. It was brewed by chewing rice and spitting it into a bowl where the enzymes in saliva began fermentation. Crude, yes, but effective and strangely intimate. The act of creating alcohol, literally with one's breath, made drinking it feel like sharing a secret. Later, when yeast replaced human mouths, the intimacy remained. People still called it mouth sake. Old habits linger even when they no longer make sense. For centuries, the rice harvest dictated more than just diet. It set the nation's emotional calendar. Good sake years made for generous festivals, full of song and warmth. Bad years birthed ghosts, restless, hungry spirits said to wander rice fields under full moons, their faces pale as sake foam. The people said these were the souls of farmers who died without tasting their own harvest. Superstition, perhaps? But superstition always grows where effort meets uncertainty. When sack finally reached the samurai class, it came dressed in ceremony. Rice, the peasant's burden, became the warrior's indulgence. But even then, a trace of humility clung to it. Every sip reminded them that pleasure began in mud. Drinking was not simply indulgence, it was gratitude disguised as excess. You sense that somewhere between the field and the cup, intoxication became philosophy. At harvest festivals, villagers would fill wooden cups and toast the moon. They believed the reflection of the moon on the sake's surface connected heaven and earth for one night only. The act of drinking became cosmic. You weren't just tasting alcohol, you were swallowing light. And maybe that's what made sake different from any other drink. It didn't dull awareness, it deepened it. The farmers who brewed the first batches never saw themselves as creators of sin or joy. They were keepers of a fragile alchemy, turning fatigue into warmth, patience into celebration. Each drop held a season's worth of weather, prayer, and pain. And when they drank, they didn't escape their lives. They honored them. That was the quiet paradox of samurai Japan. Even drunkenness was disciplined. At night, after work ended, you could hear songs rising from the paddies, voices rough with exhaustion, but bright with laughter. The same men who toiled in mud all day now sang to the stars, cups lifted to the darkness. Their songs weren't about war or love, just rice, and yet, somehow, that was enough. The next morning, the fields would shimmer again, and the cycle would begin anew, but the memory of warmth lingered, like the last sweetness of sack at the back of the throat, proof that joy could be fermented even from hardship. Now, picture the city. Edo, 17th century. Lanterns flicker above narrow alleys, their glow trembling in puddles left by the evening rain. The air smells of soy sauce, smoke, and the faint tang of fermenting rice. You walk past shoji doors, behind which laughter spills like water. Inside, sake houses breathe like living creatures, warm, rhythmic, full of pulse. In these rooms, the rules of class blurred. Samurai, merchants, and laborers all sat cross-legged on the same tatami, their swords leaning quietly against the wall. The air shimmered with heat and humidity. Bowls clinked, sleeves brushed, and everyone's eyes softened under the amber haze of drink. Here, a man could forget his rank for a few hours, or pretend to. The servers moved gracefully, women in soft cotton kimonos, their laughter timed perfectly to match the music of pouring sake. They weren't just servers, they were conductors of atmosphere. They knew exactly when to refill a cup, when to let silence linger, when to laugh at a joke that wasn't funny. In Edo's sake houses, conversation itself was a kind of art form, half truth, half illusion. Outside, snow sometimes drifted past the paper screens, catching on the edges of lanterns. Inside, warmth ruled. People loosened their robes, let the world dissolve. The room smelled of sweet rice and human closeness. You can almost hear the faint hiss of hot sack being poured into ceramic cups. That small, sacred sound of hospitality. Etiquette dictated that you never poured for yourself. To fill your own cup was to declare loneliness. To pour for another was to promise connection. Each exchange became a quiet negotiation. Who mattered, who didn't, who was trusted enough to refill your cup before it emptied. The rhythm of pouring became its own language, soft and intimate, where gratitude replaced words. In one corner, a samurai sits perfectly straight, his composure immaculate. Across from him, a merchant laughs too loud, red-faced, drunk on equality. For a moment, the barrier between them melts. Sake does what politics never could. It levels. You realize that intoxication here was never rebellion. It was therapy. It allowed people to forget their place long enough to remember their humanity. As the night deepens, the room changes. The laughter slows. The air thickens with the scent of rice and nostalgia. Someone hums a folk song, soft and slightly off-key. Heads bow, not in reverence, but in fatigue. You feel the unspoken truth drifting through the steam. No one here drinks to escape. They drink to endure. Every sake house had its ghost stories. Some said the spilled drink soaked into the floorboards and fermented again, trapping the laughter of the dead. On quiet nights, the staff swore they could hear cups clinking in empty rooms, but no one feared it. To be haunted by joy, they said, was a blessing. Outside, the streets empty. Lanterns flicker out one by one. The last customers stumble into the cold, robes loose, cheeks flushed. Behind them, a woman sweeps the floor, humming softly, the faint smell of rice wine still clinging to the air. Tomorrow she'll open again, and the same faces will return, pretending they've forgotten, but never really trying to. Sake houses, for all their noise, were temples of quiet longing. People came not to get drunk, but to feel less alone while doing it. That's the paradox that defines every era. Even in chaos, humans find ways to make loneliness communal. And maybe that's what made the sake house sacred, not its walls, not its drinks, but the warmth between strangers who pretended, for one night, to be family. You can tell a lot about a samurai by how he drinks. Not by how much, but by how little it shows. The same man who could cleave another in half with one strike would raise a cup as delicately as a poet handling ink. In Edo, Japan, alcohol was not indulgence. It was discipline tested under fog. The challenge wasn't in holding your liquor, but in holding your dignity after it. A samurai's relationship with sake was measured, precise. To drink was to expose your inner self, but never to lose control of it. Every sip carried both permission and danger, a reminder that even relaxation had rules. At formal gatherings, sake was served in strict order, poured, bowed, accepted, bowed again. The rhythm of drinking followed the rhythm of respect. One wrong motion could turn a toast into an insult. The cups were small on purpose. They forced you to drink slowly, to pause between sips, to notice everything: the fragrance of the rice, the warmth in your chest, the faint tremor of candlelight across the surface. Even intoxication had to be elegant. Drunkenness that drew attention was vulgar. Intoxication that appeared calm was art. You sense how much of Japan's grace was built on that paradox. To lose yourself gracefully without looking lost, sake, for the samurai, was both weapon and refuge. It softened judgment without erasing caution. It warmed loyalty, loosened tongues, and occasionally unbound truth. Many alliances were forged with raised cups, and many betrayals confessed under the same. To drink together was to share risk. The gesture meant more than the words that followed it. During feasts, warriors would pour for each other, never for themselves. This simple act carried enormous meaning. It wasn't just politeness, it was surrender. By letting someone else fill your cup, you offered them your life, trusting they wouldn't poison it. That silent, shared trust was a deeper bond than any oath shouted in the open. There were sayings among samurai: "A sober man hides his sword, a drunk man sheathes his soul." It meant that true courage wasn't found in battle, but in moments when you allowed someone to see your weakness. In that sense, sake was a mirror. It showed what the armor hid: pride, sorrow, loneliness. And yet, even here, vulnerability had to follow rules. You could be human for one night, but you had to be heroic again by sunrise. The strictness of this ritual drinking made it strangely intimate. Imagine sitting in a dim tatami room, the air heavy with incense and low conversation. Across from you, your superior raises his cup. You bow, you pour, you drink. The warmth creeps through your chest. The world softens, and for a fleeting moment, hierarchy disappears. Then it returns, sharper than before. Alcohol became a brief rebellion that always ended in surrender. Of course, not every samurai followed the rules. Some let go completely, staggering through the streets of Edo after curfew, swords clattering, pride undone. Others drank alone, in silence, writing haiku between sips. Drunken poetry was common among the educated elite. Verses scribbled at midnight, soaked in melancholy. They weren't masterpieces. They were confessions written in vapor. There's an old proverb: "Sake reveals what water hides." It meant more than it said. For the samurai, water represented order: clear, reflective, controlled. Sake represented the opposite: blur, warmth, release. The two liquids shaped every aspect of their world: water for purification, sake for revelation. To live well was to balance both without drowning in either. In the end, the goal wasn't to stay sober or to get drunk. It was to hover perfectly in between, that narrow state where awareness loosens but doesn't vanish. The Japanese called it yorokobi no yoi, the joyful intoxication. It's that sweet spot between laughter and silence, where the mind stops fighting itself. You might call it peace. They called it good manners. When the drinking was done, and the last cup set down, the samurai would bow again, to his host, to his companions, to the empty air. The gesture wasn't for them. It was for himself, a reminder that even pleasure, if practiced correctly, could be another form of discipline. Long before samurai learned to sip in silence, monks were already perfecting the art of divine intoxication. Deep in mountain temples, far from the noise of Edo, the air smelled not of incense, but of fermenting rice. Steam drifted from wooden vats, glowing in candlelight like soft halos. The monks moved slowly, their white robes damp from labor. You can almost hear it, the low hum of chanting mixing with the quiet bubbling of sake coming to life. They called it Nihonshu, Japan's liquor, though the word liquor feels wrong. It wasn't about pleasure, it was devotion in liquid form. To the monks, brewing was prayer. Every grain of rice had to be washed, steamed, and cooled by hand. The yeast starter, the koji, was alive, unpredictable. If it thrived, the sake sang. If it died, silence followed. The process mirrored life itself. Delicate, fragile, easily spoiled by too much heat or haste. During winter, the temple breweries came alive with ritual precision. The monks rose before dawn, washed in cold water, and began their work in perfect stillness. They believed that any impurity of thought could corrupt the brew, so they chanted, soft, rhythmic, to keep the mind clean as they stirred. Each movement was a meditation, each sound a heartbeat of faith. The first sip of freshly brewed sake was always offered to the gods. The second was taken by the abbot, who would close his eyes and taste for balance, not sweetness or bitterness, but harmony. If the sake felt too restless on the tongue, they said the monks had been careless with their thoughts. The brew remembers everything, one proverb warned. Even silence has flavor. This sacred drink became the foundation of countless rituals. Weddings, harvests, funerals, all began and ended with sake. At shrines, priests poured it for the kami, the divine spirits that shaped wind and fortune. During festivals, villagers drank it to join the gods in their joy. It was said that inebriation, if pure of heart, made humans easier for the gods to hear. You can see how a drink could become a bridge between earth and heaven. For samurai, temple sake became both sacrament and symbol. They believed it carried protection, purification, and clarity, even when it blurred the senses. A warrior might drink before battle not to dull fear, but to share communion with ancestors. The warmth in his stomach reminded him that courage was also a kind of intoxication. The monks, though, saw a deeper truth. They understood that every act of creation required surrender, of control, of ego, of certainty. Brewing sake was no different. You couldn't force fermentation, you could only nurture it, and that, perhaps, is why the drink felt so alive. It was never conquered, it was persuaded. When travelers passed by mountain temples, they were often invited in for a cup. The monks served it warm, never hot, saying, "Let the spirit wake gently." The guest would bow, sip, and feel the world slow around him. The taste was unlike anything else. Faintly floral, faintly earthy, perfectly quiet. It didn't intoxicate so much as it humbled. Centuries later, even as Edo grew loud and decadent, the temple brewers remained unchanged. Their sake was simple, their lives quieter. They brewed not for fame, but for continuity. And every drop, they believed, carried a whisper of enlightenment, proof that even pleasure could be sacred if approached with care. When you think of those monks, their faces half lit by firelight, stirring rice that hissed like soft rain, you realize something profound. Getting drunk wasn't always about forgetting. Sometimes it was about remembering that life itself is a fragile balance between chaos and calm, noise and silence, heat and grace. And maybe that's why, even now, when you lift a cup of sake and feel the warmth bloom beneath your ribs, it feels a little like prayer and a little like home. The alleys of Edo smelled like roasted fish, damp straw, and spilled sake. The narrow streets twisted like ribbons through the city, packed with stalls, paper lanterns, and laughter that refused to die even after curfew. Here, alcohol wasn't poured from elegant flasks or served on lacquer trays. It came in cracked cups, warmed over charcoal, passed from one rough hand to another. You feel it immediately, the heat, the noise, the closeness. Sake was no longer divine in these places. It was survival with a pleasant aftertaste. Fishermen, woodcutters, and merchants crowded into tiny rooms the size of closets, ducking under low beams. Their clothes reeked of smoke and salt, their hands blackened by labor. But for an hour or two, they were free, laughing too loud, singing too badly, pretending the world was softer than it was. In that noise, even misery found rhythm. These street bars were called kaku-uchi, corner drinkings. They appeared anywhere, beside bathhouses, under bridges, behind shrines. The sake was cheap, watered down, sometimes sour, but no one complained. For a few copper coins, you could rent warmth. There was no class, no ceremony, only company. Someone would pour from a bamboo flask, and a dozen strangers would become friends for the night. The servers, often widows or wanderers themselves, knew everyone's story. They poured like priests hearing confessions, nodding without judgment. In a city ruled by etiquette, these corners were loopholes, places where emotion could exist unpolished. Crying, laughing, arguing, all were allowed, provided the cup was never empty. And yet, even here, rules lingered. You never left a friend's cup dry, you never refused a pour, no matter how full you were. To deny a refill was to reject connection. That's why the poor often staggered home drunk, not from greed, but from gratitude. Every sip was a social promise, every refill a small mercy. Some people drank to forget taxes, others to forget loneliness. A few drank simply because sake was safer than water. The city's wells were often polluted, but the fermented drink killed whatever the river couldn't. In that sense, sake was both medicine and illusion, healing the body and numbing the heart in one slow swallow. You can imagine the sound of it. Laughter rising over crackling fires, cups clinking against rough wood, the rain tapping gently on rooftops. The world outside was dark and cold, but in those corners, everything glowed amber. The warmth wasn't just from drink, it came from being seen, even briefly, in a city too crowded to notice anyone for long. When the money ran out, some stayed anyway, washing dishes for another pour. Others simply sat near the heat, inhaling the scent of alcohol and pretending it was enough. No one mocked them. Poverty wasn't shameful here, sobriety was. Every night ended the same way, the last drinkers stumbling into the street, humming fragments of songs, their shadows dancing under lantern light. Somewhere behind them, a broom swept the floor. and a woman whispered, "See you tomorrow," knowing she would. In the quiet that followed, the smell of sake lingered in the air. Sweet, sour, human. Proof that even the forgotten knew how to celebrate being alive. While the poor found comfort in corner bars, another kind of intoxication shimmered just beyond reach, the ukiyo, or floating world. This was the dreamlike realm of courtesans, actors, and poets, where reality bent under the weight of desire and sake flowed like silk. You step into it now, the air thick with perfume, shamisen strings trembling like wind through paper walls, laughter soft as the flicker of a lantern. The floating world was born from contradiction. It was both pleasure and escape, beauty and ruin. Here, a single cup of sake could cost a day's wage, not for the drink itself, but for the company that came with it. Men entered sober and left haunted, not by ghosts, but by the gentle cruelty of perfection. In tea houses of the Yoshiwara district, geisha moved like moonlight, silent and precise. Their robes shimmered with embroidered cranes and cherry blossoms. Every gesture, the way they lifted a cup, tilted a head, or hid a smile, was choreography. You notice how sake wasn't just served here, it was performed. The geisha's skill was knowing exactly how much to pour. Enough to warm the spirit, never enough to dull it. Their task wasn't to intoxicate the body, but to intoxicate the imagination. They could make a man believe he was interesting, wise, or even loved, for as long as the bottle lasted. When the last drop fell, so did the illusion. Many samurai found themselves here after dark, stripped of armor but not of loneliness. They came to Yoshiwara to feel human again, to laugh without consequence, to be touched without battle, to drink without politics. And yet, they always left more hollow than before. The sake in these houses wasn't for courage or prayer, it was for forgetting. Behind the glamour, the reality was quieter. The women who poured the drinks rarely drank them. They lived in endless twilight, where beauty was duty and intoxication belonged to others. Theirs was a different kind of drunkenness, the exhaustion of constant grace. Some whispered that the courtesan's smiles were trained as carefully as their songs, and maybe that was true. Still, within this artificial paradise, small moments of sincerity existed. A shared laugh that wasn't rehearsed. A clumsy haiku scratched on a sake label, a drunken promise neither party expected to keep. These were the fragments of realness that made the dream bearable. When dawn approached, the lanterns dimmed and the illusion thinned. The streets outside were silent except for the soft tread of gaiter sandals and the faint rattle of carts carrying emptied barrels. The floating world sank back into shadow, waiting to rise again at sunset. You can almost see it, a single cup left behind on a lacquered tray, a smear of lipstick on its rim. The room smells of incense and sweetness turned stale. In that silence, you understand the truth of Yoshiwara. It wasn't about pleasure at all. It was about the ache that follows it. And so ends the first act, a world of mud and silk, of farmers and courtesans, of sacred monks and drunken warriors, all bound by the same drink, the same need to blur the edges of a life too sharp to face sober. Topic 1. The battle before the bottle. The cold air before a samurai battle was thick with stillness. You can almost hear it, the creak of armor, the quiet breathing of horses, the faint whistle of wind over banners. Somewhere among the ranks, a sack bottle passed from hand to hand. Each warrior took a small sip, enough to feel warmth bloom in his chest. It wasn't courage in a cup, it was farewell disguised as ritual. The act was called kenzen, the purification before death. To fight sober was to risk fear. To drink too much was to lose control. So each man sought the middle path. Clarity softened by heat. The sake was sometimes mixed with herbs, sometimes with tears. It didn't matter. What mattered was the moment of calm between life and eternity. You picture it. Rows of helmets glinting like dark mirrors, steam rising from nostrils in the cold. Someone mutters a poem, someone else laughs too loudly, pretending not to tremble. The bottle moves again, and the world seems gentler. A sip for the ancestors, a sip for the gods, and finally, one for yourself. The taste of rice and smoke becomes the taste of acceptance. For samurai, death was supposed to be beautiful, clean, composed, unflinching. But beauty is difficult when your hands shake. Sake smoothed the edges. It gave them what the sword demanded, composure, not bravery exactly, but stillness deep enough to resemble it. The chronicles mention generals who forbade excessive drinking, yet secretly kept their own flasks hidden. Even discipline needs anesthesia. Some claimed sake steadied the sword, others swore it clouded the spirit. Both were right. A little warmth steadied the hand, but too much turned courage to chaos. Balance, always balance. That was the lesson Japan never stopped teaching itself. When the fighting began, the smell of rice wine lingered over the battlefield. It mingled with sweat and iron and the strange sweetness of blood. Later, survivors said they could still taste it. That faint trace of sake caught in the air like the ghost of a final toast. For them, intoxication and death became twins, inseparable and oddly serene. After battle, victors poured sake on the ground for the fallen. The gesture wasn't grief, it was gratitude. They believed the dead drank through the earth, sipping from puddles of spilled warmth. To waste alcohol was unthinkable, except for the dead. That was the only waste that mattered. In time, this ritual turned into memory. Even in peace, samurai would drink before duels, before journeys, before any moment that might end in silence. The bottle became a companion, the way one keeps a friend who never interrupts. It's strange to think that what we call drinking was once a form of meditation. The slow pour, the deliberate sip, the measured breath, it all echoes the precision of sword practice. The same grace that guided the blade also guided the cup. Perhaps that's why sake survived every reform, every ban. It taught patience disguised as pleasure. You imagine the aftermath. Dawn over the battlefield, the wind carrying the faint rattle of empty cups among the ashes. The sun rises, the snow melts, and the warmth of sake lingers somewhere deep beneath the frost. And you realize, for the samurai, to get drunk was not to escape death, it was to welcome it politely. Topic 2. The forbidden taverns of Edo. Not every drink in Japan was ceremonial. In the back alleys of Edo, hidden behind sliding doors painted black, were taverns where rules went to die. The law forbade them. The people built more anyway. They were called yami sakaya, shadow bars. You find one now in your mind. No sign, no lantern, just a thin line of smoke escaping into the night. Inside, the air is heavy with steam, laughter, and the scent of grilled eel. Candles sputter in sack bottles repurposed as lanterns. The customers speak softly, though none of them are quiet people. Merchants pretending to be monks, samurai pretending to be merchants. Everyone here hides behind someone else's shadow. In a country obsessed with appearances, these hidden bars were acts of rebellion. Here, men and women could say what they couldn't say in daylight. They traded gossip, poetry, rumors, sometimes even secrets of the shogunate. The price of silence was always another drink. And so, the taverns of the underworld became engines of truth, fueled by rice and risk. Authorities raided them often, smashing cups and dragging owners to prison. But the next night, another would appear. Like mushrooms after rain, Yami Sakaya grew wherever suppression did. Some were so small that customers had to sit back to back. Others hid inside legitimate bathhouses, where steam masked both smell and sound. There's an old tale of a sake mistress who ran one of these bars for 20 years without being caught. She claimed her secret was charm, not cunning. When inspectors arrived, she would bow so deeply they forgot what they came for. "A woman who can pour without spilling," she once said, "can pour truth without leaving a trace." The drinks served here were stronger. Doboroku, unfiltered sake, thick enough to chew. It hit the stomach like a spark, rough but honest. Men swore it made them braver. Women said it made them real. After 2 cups, laughter filled the room. After 4, tears. After 6, everyone was family. Sometimes samurai visited in disguise, their swords wrapped in cloth. They drank beside carpenters and beggars, listening more than they spoke. These nights blurred the edges of society, a dangerous luxury. To be seen laughing with a commoner could end a career, yet they came anyway. Sake makes philosophers of everyone eventually. The taverns became places of strange equality. Here, no one bowed, rank dissolved like rice in water. The poor could mock the rich, and the rich could confess their fear of poverty. It was dangerous honesty, born from warmth and recklessness. For a culture built on restraint, these nights were lightning in a bottle. When morning came, the door slid open, and the world's order returned. The same men who had sung together would pass each other on the street, eyes down, pretending not to know. The silence between them was its own kind of hangover, tender, embarrassed, human. Every Yami Sakaya eventually vanished, burned, banned, or simply forgotten. But their ghosts linger in every backstreet bar of modern Tokyo. The same dim light, the same clinking cups, the same quiet promise that even in a disciplined nation, rebellion will always find a drink. Topic 3: the festivals of drunken faith. You smell it before you see it, the smoke of roasted chestnuts, the faint sweetness of rice cakes, the sharp tang of spilled sake on cold stone. It's festival night in Edo, and the streets are alive. Paper lanterns glow like floating suns. Children run with masks too large for their faces, and drums echo from temple courtyards. Every few steps, another hand offers you a drink. Tonight, sobriety would be considered impolite. These celebrations, known as matsuri, began as religious rituals, offerings to the gods of harvest, water, and fortune. But humans, being human, quickly added joy to the list of acceptable devotions. Sake, they believed, pleased the gods because it loosened the human heart, made laughter easier, prayer louder, generosity more likely. The boundary between worship and party blurred, and no one seemed in a hurry to redraw it. You can picture the priests, solemn by day but smiling now, their faces flushed from drink. They bless barrels of sake before opening them with wooden mallets, shouting "Kanpai" as the crowd cheers. The drink pours freely, foaming and warm, spilling over hands and sleeves. For a few hours, rank vanishes. Samurai, peasants, monks, all tilt their cups toward the same sky. At some shrines, the gods themselves were said to get drunk. Statues of deities were anointed with sake, their lips brushed with the liquid so they could taste the joy of humans. The idea wasn't sacrilege, it was intimacy. The Japanese saw their gods not as distant tyrants, but as participants in life, fallible, merry, occasionally hungover. Festivals often lasted days. The first night brought dancing, the second brought mistakes. By the third, even the most dignified officials found themselves singing folk songs with strangers. The city blurred into laughter, and in that blur, something profound happened. Hierarchy dissolved. Everyone, from fisherman to daimyo, remembered they were temporary. It's strange how joy and danger often share the same space. The same sake that made people dance also fueled fights, fires, and confessions. In a culture obsessed with order, these moments of chaos were tolerated, even cherished, because they reminded people that control wasn't the same as peace. The festivals ended not with silence, but with exhaustion. As dawn broke, people slept in doorways, wrapped in borrowed cloaks, heads resting on empty barrels. The streets smelled of rice and ash, and dreams evaporating. Somewhere, a priest swept the temple steps, humming softly, as if the gods themselves had left a hangover behind. You realize that in Japan, intoxication was never only about pleasure. It was a rehearsal for loss, a practice of letting go before life forced you to. The laughter, the mistakes, the forgiveness that followed, it was all part of the same cycle. Even today, during New Year's celebrations, when people raise cups of sake to the first sunrise, they're not just welcoming a new year, they're reenacting that ancient truth. That warmth, however brief, is still worth chasing. And so, beneath the laughter, beneath the lanterns, there's always something sacred, a reminder that joy itself is a form of prayer. Topic 4. Poets of the Cup. If the temples made sake holy and the festivals made it communal, the poets made it eternal. You can almost see them, slouched over low tables, brushes in hand, eyes half closed, cups emptying faster than thoughts. The paper smells faintly of ink and plum wine. Outside, the night hums with crickets. Inside, the silence feels like confession. In Edo's literary circles, to write sober was considered rude. The best verses, they said, required at least 3 cups. One to loosen the hand, one to open the heart, and one to forget which was which. They called it haikai no sake, the poet's drink. It wasn't about sloppiness, it was about surrender. True beauty, they believed, came only when the mind stopped editing the soul. Basho, the master of haiku, famously wrote about sake as both companion and rival. "The moon and I," he once said, "drink each other's light." That image captures what intoxication meant to artists. Not escape, but conversation. Between heaven and earth, man and moment, sobriety and dream. In the dim corners of Kyoto tea houses, painters and writers met to trade verses for drinks. A single haiku could earn a bottle if it made someone laugh or sigh. The air would fill with laughter, slurred recitations, and the occasional argument over syllables. Poetry, like sake, demanded balance. Too much formality, and it soured. Too much chaos, and it spilled. Women wrote, too, though their verses were often unsigned. Their poems were quieter, sharper, written from the margins. One anonymous line survives from the 1600s. I pour for him, he forgets my name again, still I smile. It says more about love, loss, and the quiet power of ritual than any drunken boast could. The poets treated drunkenness as an aesthetic state, a lens that made the world softer, more bearable. Through sake, sadness turned poetic, loneliness turned noble. It was less about the drink itself and more about what it revealed: impermanence. The Japanese called it mono no aware, the gentle sadness of things passing. Alcohol didn't erase that feeling, it deepened it just enough to make it beautiful. Many artists died young, their health eroded by cheap rice wine and late-night philosophy, but they died content. Better one night of joy, one painter wrote, than 100 sober mornings. It wasn't recklessness, it was math. They had weighed the cost of awareness and chosen warmth. Their words survived longer than their bodies. You still find their verses scribbled on scrolls and tavern walls, ink faded like memory. When you read them, you can almost taste the sack between the lines, the warmth, the laughter, the quiet regret. In modern Japan, poets still raise cups to those long-gone dreamers. During spring festivals, people gather beneath cherry blossoms, drink sake, and compose haiku about falling petals. It's the same ritual centuries later, the celebration of impermanence disguised as fun. And as you imagine those poets, their robes loose, their words soft, their hearts open, you understand something the sober world forgets. Intoxication, at its best, isn't about losing yourself. It's about remembering that you never owned yourself to begin with. Topic 5. When the cup turned poison. There's a silence that follows too much laughter. The kind that settles after the cup runs dry. You can feel it now, heavy and slow, like the ache that comes after joy. In every sake story, there's a moment when warmth becomes weight, when ritual turns into dependence. Even in disciplined Japan, some men drank not for meaning, but because they couldn't stop. They called it sake no yami, the darkness of drink. It began quietly. A samurai who once drank only on holidays now poured every night. A poet who once toasted the moon began talking to it. The same ritual that once calmed the soul now consumed it. In a culture built on balance, this loss of control was more shameful than poverty. Addiction, in those days, was not treated with pity. It was seen as a moral collapse, a spiritual crack in the armor. For a samurai, to stumble drunk in public meant more than embarrassment. It meant dishonor. Some, unable to bear the humiliation, ended their lives with ritual suicide, leaving behind poems that read like apologies to the bottle. There's one story from the Edo period about a retainer who poisoned himself with his master's sake rather than live as a drunk. His final note read, "The rice forgave me. I did not forgive myself." It sounds dramatic, but you can sense the truth beneath it. The quiet despair of a man who mistook pleasure for peace. Commoners were less tragic, but no less broken. Drunken brawls in alleyways were common enough that the city guard had a special term for them: sake storms. They would find men asleep in gutters, their swords missing, their dignity evaporated. The same cup that once symbolized unity now revealed the fractures in the human heart. Even temples weren't spared. Monks who brewed sacred sake sometimes fell to their own creation. One chronicle tells of a priest found asleep among his barrels, murmuring prayers between hiccups. His brothers said they didn't punish him, they simply stopped brewing for a year, as if the spirit itself needed to sober up. The shogunate tried to intervene, imposing taxes and bans on strong sake. They failed. Every time a rule was written, a loophole was found. People brewed in secret, claiming it was for ancestor offerings. No law could outdrink loneliness. But for all its damage, Japan never demonized alcohol. Instead, it learned to forgive it, and the people who fell to it. There was an understanding, whispered rather than spoken. Even mistakes, when made gracefully, were part of life's rhythm. You realize now that sake was never the villain, it was simply a mirror. Some saw reflection, others saw distortion. The difference depended on how much they poured, and so the bottle remained on the table, half empty, half full, waiting for whoever needed it next. Topic 6. The betrayals brewed in silence. In the flickering light of the shogun's palace, loyalty was sacred. But loyalty, like sake, could turn sour overnight. There were stories whispered among servants of assassins who slipped poison into ceremonial cups, of rival clans who toasted peace with death disguised as sweetness. In Japan, betrayal often arrived warm. The most infamous tale belongs to the court of Oda Nobunaga, the warlord who tried to unite Japan under one rule. During a victory feast, his general, Akechi Mitsuhide, poured his lord a cup of sake with trembling hands. Nobunaga laughed, drank, and clapped his shoulder. 2 days later, Mitsuhide betrayed him, leading the ambush that ended his life. Some say that final toast was a farewell disguised as respect. Poisoning through sake wasn't common, but the fear of it was enough to shape etiquette. High-ranking samurai demanded their drinks be poured in their sight. Some had tasters, others simply trusted fate. To refuse a cup, however, was to insult your host. So men drank carefully, smiling as if courage could hide paranoia. The paranoia spread beyond the elite. Merchants who grew too rich were sometimes found dead with half-empty bottles beside them. Accidents, officials said, but everyone knew the taste of revenge could be fermented too. Sake was supposed to bring unity. Instead, it sometimes became the silent accomplice of ambition. In darker corners, the betrayal was emotional, not lethal. Drunken confessions during banquets often unraveled alliances. A careless insult, a slip of the tongue, a joke that revealed too much. Countless friendships died by the cup. Sake loosened the lips faster than forgiveness could catch up. Among geisha and courtesans, betrayal had a different flavor. Lovers promised eternity after 3 cups and forgot by morning. The women learned not to believe men who quoted poetry while pouring. A drunk man's truth, one geisha once said, evaporates with the morning tea. But the most dangerous betrayals were quiet, those against oneself. A samurai who drank to forget his master's cruelty. A widow who drank to silence grief. A monk who drank because enlightenment was lonelier than ignorance. None of them harmed others. They simply disappeared behind their own smiles. The Japanese had a saying, "The sake that burns your throat is the one you drink alone." You can feel the sting of that line. It's less about alcohol than about the ache of isolation. The warmth that once connected people now reminded them of its absence. Even the cup itself became symbolic. Porcelain for ceremony, lacquer for elegance, wood for mourning. To choose the wrong one at the wrong time could be a social sin. But in the end, they all held the same truth. Liquid comfort, temporary and kind, indifferent to who drank it. And yet, for all the betrayals it witnessed, sake remained Japan's most loyal companion. Because even when it revealed the worst in people, it also reminded them that they still felt something. Pain, guilt, longing, all proof of being alive. When you think about it, maybe that's the real reason they kept drinking. Not to escape truth, but to face it more gently. Topic 7. Love in a cup of sake. It begins with the sound of rain. You can almost hear it, soft, steady, tapping against shoji screens. Inside, two people sit across from each other, a single candle between them, its flame trembling like a secret. The sake is warm, the air thick with silence. This isn't a feast or a ritual. It's something quieter. Two hearts trying to say what language can't. In Japan, love rarely shouted. It bowed, it poured. The act of sharing sake between lovers was called aichu no sake. Sorrowful drink. It wasn't tragic, just tender. Each pour meant, I see you. Each sip meant, I'm still here. To drink together was to promise memory, even if the morning would take it away. Among samurai, affection was often hidden behind duty. Yet, even warriors found softness in the ritual of drink. Letters survived from soldiers at the frontier. Words written with ink that bled like spilled sake. If I do not return, one wrote to his wife, drink for two and tell the cup I was kind. You can almost taste the ache in that line, the sweetness of loyalty bruised by distance. In Edo's floating world, love and intoxication were twins. Courtesans offered warmth that faded with dawn, but for a few hours, it felt eternal. The sake they shared wasn't meant to blur desire. It was meant to slow it, stretch it, let the illusion breathe. Every smile, every pour, every stolen glance under candlelight carried both joy and premonition. Sometimes couples exchanged sansankudo, 339 sips, a wedding ritual older than most temples. Each person drank 3 times from 3 cups of increasing size. The gesture wasn't legal or political, it was spiritual. 3 sips for heaven, earth, and humanity, 3 more for past, present, and future. The last 3 for body, mind, and soul. A marriage sealed not with vows, but with warmth. The beauty of Japanese love was always its restraint. No grand declarations, no endless speeches, just 2 hands, 1 cup, and the shared stillness between sips. Even heartbreak had grace. Lovers who parted would sometimes meet one last time to share a drink, not to rekindle, but to remember. They believed that ending something gently was the highest form of affection. In poems, sake was often the third participant, the listener that understood what words ruined. We drink, one verse said, so our hearts can whisper without fear. That's why sake cups were small. Not for moderation, but for repetition. Each refill became another chance to say what couldn't be said directly. And yet, love through alcohol was always temporary. The warmth faded, the clarity returned, and so did the walls between people. But even that impermanence was part of the beauty. In Japan, they didn't mourn fleeting moments. They treasured them, because they understood that eternity would be unbearable without endings. When the candle burns low, the rain softens. The last sip cools in the cup. One person smiles, the other looks down. You can feel the unspoken gratitude in the air, not for what lasted, but for what existed at all. Love, like sake, was never meant to last forever. It was meant to be tasted and remembered gently. Topic 8. The Drunken Philosopher. By dawn, the streets are quiet again. The city has sobered, but in a small tea house near the river, a scholar still sits alone. His inkstone is dry, his cup is not. You can almost smell the faint tang of rice and rain on his breath. He's been drinking since midnight, but not for joy, for clarity. To the thinkers of Edo, sake was not escape, but experiment. It tested perception. A cup of sake, they wrote, removes the distance between thought and truth. Too much, and the mind drowned. Just enough, and the mind floated freely. You might call it self-delusion. They called it enlightenment. There's a legend about a Confucian scholar who, after 3 cups, declared the moon an illusion and his own name a misunderstanding. His students wrote this down as wisdom. In truth, he was just drunk enough to sound profound. Yet somehow the idea survived. That's the strange magic of sake. It makes even absurdity sound sincere. Zen monks, too, wrestled with the contradiction. Enlightenment demanded sobriety, yet awareness required experience. Some sects banned alcohol completely, others embraced it as a tool for transcendence. A few monks even claimed that the instant before drunkenness, that shimmering edge where thoughts loosen but don't fall apart, was the closest thing to enlightenment a man could feel without dying. The philosopher drunk was not chaotic. He was quiet, slow, deliberate. He poured with precision, as if measuring the line between madness and clarity. His journals, filled with calligraphy blurred by drops of sake, read like riddles. When the water reflects the moon, who is drunk, the lake or the light? It's nonsense, of course, but beautiful nonsense. Among artists and poets, this state had a name. Yojo no Yoi, the good intoxication. It was the point where inspiration arrived uninvited, where the boundary between effort and ease dissolved. In that twilight between reason and dream, entire philosophies were born, most of them forgotten by morning. But not all drunken wisdom was mystical. Some philosophers used alcohol simply to soften the pain of awareness. To think deeply, after all, is to suffer vividly. Sake dulled the edges just enough to make reflection bearable. They weren't chasing insight, they were cushioning it. You can imagine one of them now, staring into his cup, the reflection of the candle trembling like an idea not yet formed. He raises it, drinks slowly, and smiles. Not because he's found the answer, but because the question no longer hurts. In their writings, these men often compared sake to life itself. Sweet at first, then bitter, then gone too soon. What made it meaningful wasn't how long it lasted, but how deeply it was savored. The wiser they became, the smaller their cups grew. And when they finally stopped writing, stopped drinking, stopped searching altogether, they called it the Great Sobriety. Not the end of intoxication, but its fulfillment. Because in the end, to understand life fully, you had to be both drunk and sober at once, awake enough to notice and kind enough not to mind. Topic 9. The spirits who drank back. The Japanese have always believed that every object, every corner, every drop of water holds a spirit, a kami. It's why nothing is wasted, and why even a spilled drink deserves an apology. You can almost feel it now, the faint tremor of respect before every pour, as if the sake itself were listening. But sometimes the spirits listened too closely. In rural villages, people whispered about sakegami, the wine gods that haunted breweries and taverns. They said that if you brewed with greed instead of gratitude, the spirit of the rice would rebel, barrels would burst, yeast would rot, and drinkers would fall ill. Some claimed they'd seen the spirits themselves, translucent figures, dripping with sweet-smelling mist, hovering above vats at midnight. To appease them, brewers left the first cup of every batch untouched. It was called kamizake, the god's sake. A small wooden cup placed near the fire, steaming gently into the night. If the vapor rose straight, it meant the gods were pleased. If it wavered, the monks knew to start again. The sake knows, they would say softly, and so do the gods. There were other stories, stranger ones. A man who spilled sake on a shrine step and laughed about it later found his bottles turned to vinegar overnight. Another claimed a fox spirit visited him in disguise, drinking half his stock before vanishing, leaving behind a trail of paw prints and the faint smell of citrus. He wasn't angry, he left an offering the next day. You didn't curse the spirits, you courted them. The belief wasn't superstition. It was etiquette extended to the unseen. If sake brought people closer to each other, surely it could bring them closer to gods, ghosts, everything in between. Drinking became not just communion, but collaboration. Every toast, every spill, every hangover had cosmic witnesses. During harvest festivals, people poured sake over stones said to house ancestral spirit. They believed the dead grew thirsty during celebrations. Better drunk ancestors, one farmer joked, than angry ones. So they poured until the soil itself smelled faintly sweet. At night, when taverns emptied, workers swore they heard laughter echoing from empty cups. Residual joy, they called it. In Japan, even happiness was believed to have an afterlife. Some said that's why you never left a cup upside down. It trapped the ghost of the last drink. The most famous story tells of a wandering monk who drank alone every night beside a river. One evening, he poured a second cup for company. The next morning, villagers found 2 cups drained and a wet handprint beside them. He never drank alone again, but he always poured 2. When you think about it, it makes sense. Alcohol, by nature, blurs boundaries between body and spirit, life and dream, memory and moment. And perhaps the Japanese didn't fear that blur. They honored it. They understood that ghosts, like drunks, only linger where warmth remains. And so, the next time someone spilled a drink, they bowed, whispered an apology, and smiled. Because in Japan, even the dead deserved a toast. Topic 10. Ghosts at the bottom of the cup. The old saying goes, look too long into your sake, and something might look back. You smile at the idea, but in Edo, Japan, few took it lightly. They believed reflections in sake could reveal spirits, not just ghosts, but emotions given form. The drink was a mirror, and sometimes mirrors showed more than faces. One legend tells of a widow who saw her husband's reflection in her cup years after his death. She watched in silence as it smiled, then faded. The next morning, she sold her mirror and swore never to drink again. Her neighbors said the ghost wasn't a curse, it was gratitude, one last visit through the veil of warmth. Ghost stories and alcohol went hand in hand. In smoky inns and roadside taverns, travelers traded tales about cursed breweries, haunted tea houses, and restless drinkers who refused to die sober. The line between myth and memory was always blurred by Sachs' gentle fog. You can almost hear it, the low hum of a storyteller's voice, the clink of cups punctuating each twist of fear. One tale speaks of the shurayoi, the battle drunkard, a samurai who died mid-toast but kept rising every night to finish it. Locals said his armor rattled when the moon was full, and that empty cups filled themselves when left outside his grave. No one ever dared interrupt him. They said even death respected determination. There were friendlier ghosts too, spirits of brewers who lingered out of love for their craft. Workers claimed the best sack always came from haunted cellars. The dead, they said, no better recipes. So when the air turned cold and the vat steamed just right, some would whisper, "Help us, old master," before stirring. And maybe, somehow, they were helped. Alcohol softened fear. It let people laugh at death without defying it. That's why ghost stories were told during drinking, to flirt with the unknown in a way that felt safe. Between laughter and unease, between the sip and the shiver, people found a kind of balance. The idea of haunting wasn't punishment, it was continuity. To the Japanese, even ghosts needed warmth. So during Obon, the festival of the dead, families left cups of sake beside lanterns to guide spirits home. So they don't go thirsty, the elders would say. You can imagine the night, hundreds of small lights floating down rivers, their reflections trembling like the surface of spilled drink. In this world, intoxication wasn't sin, it was remembrance, a way to keep the invisible close. Each cup became a small offering to memory itself, to everything fleeting and unfinished. Even now, modern bars in Kyoto sometimes leave the first pour untouched for the ones who came before. The glass fogs a little, as if someone unseen has taken a sip. You can almost believe it. And as the candlelight fades, you realize the truth beneath every ghost story, that the line between spirit and memory is thinner than the rim of a sake cup, and just as easily crossed. Topic 11, Revelry on the Road. Drunken miles along the Tokaido night, gathers along the Tokaido, and you smell sea air mixing with pine smoke from roadside hearths. Lanterns swing on crooked posts, throwing ovals of amber across wet stones. Inside a wayside inn, travelers steam like dumplings as rain drips from straw cloaks. The room breathes warmth and rice. A clay jar thumps on the floor, its cork surrendered. You hear the polite clatter of cups, that small percussion of agreement. The road has teeth, but tonight it chews gently. Tomorrow it will bite again. These inns were the country's bloodstream, waypoints where monks, merchants, and samurai shared heat, gossip, and fermented courage. Rules relaxed with distance, status shrank to the size of a travel permit. A humble cup cost less than shelter, so people bought two. Sack oiled joints and made strangers compatible. It mattered because Japan's economy and ideas traveled with those flasks. Roads didn't just move goods, they moved moods. If philosophy needed legs, it borrowed someone tipsy. Host read the room the way sailors read weather, by faces, not maps. A weary samurai received warm sake to soften armor. A merchant got it cooled to sharpen negotiation. Salted squid appeared for those who looked poetic, grilled mackerel for those who didn't. This tiny hospitality reduced conflict better than any edict. You could say public order depended on hot rice and correct temperature, which is both ridiculous and correct, like most truths that actually work. Pilgrims passed with bells tied to staffs, the metal singing against rain. They drank sparingly, enough to loosen prayers, not lose directions. Shrines ahead promise stamps and salvation, inns promise blankets and benign forgetfulness. The balance mattered. Too sober, and the journey felt endless. Too drunk, and the shrine moved farther away. Moderation wasn't moral here, it was arithmetic, measured in footsteps that still needed taking at dawn. Couriers arrived like weather fronts, smelling of horse and haste. They drank standing, cups like commas in breathless sentences. Their world was deadlines and sealed letters. Sake turned urgency into trajectory, still fast, but less frantic. A courier once said that warm rice wine fills the empty parts of the wind. That sounds like poetry, which means he probably spilled some on the message and invented a metaphor to explain the stain. Artists haunted these inns, sketching travelers with ink that blushed under sake steam. They sold quick portraits for coins and refills, capturing faces before memory dissolved them. Many prints of the Tokaido owe their soft lines to soft heads. If the eaves droop a little or lanterns seem kinder than physics allows, that's not inaccuracy. That's intoxication documented, a geography of warmth the official maps ignored. Kitchen noise was its own lullaby, the whisk of miso, the click of chopsticks, the hiss of eel fat on iron. In that music, grudges forgot choreography. Enemies found themselves nodding at the same salted plum. Sake turned rivalry into rhythm, at least until second cups became fourth. Then the innkeeper gently replaced cups with tea and called it sober soup, which fooled exactly no one but prevented broken noses. Storm nights were the best. Wind shoved at shutters, and people leaned closer to hear one another. Stories thickened. A monk confessed to stealing persimmons as a child. A samurai admitted he feared dentists more than death. Laughing wasn't treason when rain erased witnesses. You learn that national character is often written indoors, on nights when travel stops and truth can afford to walk around without armor. Morning was always an apology. The air smelled of damp tatami and boiled barley. Travelers tied sandals, patted pouches, and pretended not to remember promises offered to strangers who looked wise by candlelight. The inn's ledger kept straighter accounts than anyone's heart. Even so, cups clinked once more, for luck, for legs, for whatever God handles blisters. Then doors slid open, and the road resumed negotiations. Sake on the road wasn't decadence, it was logistics. It stitched together distances too wide for conversation and too narrow for silence. A shared bottle meant fewer knives drawn and more stories carried to the next town. Commerce moved on carts. Trust moved in cups. It's unromantic, but then again, romance rarely keeps you from freezing in a doorway. By dusk, another inn would inhale the river of footsteps, turning strangers into steam again. Someone would set a jar by the fire for the ones still walking, a quiet kindness for late arrivals. Warmth waited like a reserved seat. In a land that prized composure, these roadside jars were the country's unadvertised mercy, proof that even discipline makes tea with compassion when the weather is bad. And so the Tokaido kept its rhythm: rain, lantern, jar, story, sleep. The road taught Japan how to drink together without losing itself along the way. If the nation had a heartbeat then, it pulsed in clay and rice, measured not in miles traveled, but in shared warmth that made travel possible at all. Topic 12. From Samurai to Salaryman. Sake survives the centuries. The room smells different now. Less smoke, more soap, less pine, more city dust after rain. Neon replaces lanterns, and the hum you hear is electricity wearing shoes. In a narrow Tokyo alley, red paper lanterns glow like patient cherries above sliding doors. Inside, a row of salarymen exhales in unison as the first warm flask arrives. The cups are the same size as Edo's, which is how you know the past enjoys recurring roles. Meiji reform split the country's spine and taught it to bow differently. Swords vanished, railways arrived, haircuts shortened, clocks started bossing everyone around, breweries modernized with thermometers and tanks, but the important part, yeast coaxed like a nervous bird, stayed stubbornly old. Sake mattered because it translated continuity into a bottle. Japan could change clothes daily if the flavor of home remained reachable by hand. Government tried to tax the comfort out of it and then encouraged breweries when revenue proved friendlier than principles. War rationed rice, and some brewers whispered apologies to their vats as they thinned the mash to survive. Temples brewed less, factories hummed more. Yet winter still smelled faintly of koji, and New Year dawn still found cups lifted to the first light. Even empires can't cancel morning rituals without filing paperwork with the human heart. Post-war years replaced tatami with linoleum and samurai with clerks who battled spreadsheets. They coined a new ceremony, the afterwork nomikai. Bosses poured, juniors bowed, and everyone agreed tomorrow would be respectably difficult. Drink with me meant I won't make your life worse before lunch. It worked imperfectly, which is still better than not working at all. Sake shifted from valor's companion to stress's accountant. The 1960s invented convenience stores that sold cold cans of almost everything. Sake learned new costumes, cartons, ring pulls, little paper cups with foil hats. Purists winced, commuters cheered, everyone kept drinking. Craft returned like a remembered song, tiny breweries polishing rice as if forgiveness were hiding under husk. Words like junmai and daiginjo became passwords for tenderness disguised as snobbery. Your tongue learned to pronounce gratitude more accurately than labels. Meanwhile, whiskey flirted with Japan and beer married it. Sake didn't sulk. It developed range, sparkling for skeptics, cloudy for nostalgics, bone dry for people who call minimalism a personality. Bars paired it with blue cheese and pizza just to watch tradition pretend not to be amused. The drink survived by practicing what samurai taught it: composure under changing weather. Women took the helm in breweries their grandfathers once guarded like dragon hordes. Laboratory coats shared space with shrine charms. Climate control met wooden tanks, and both nodded. The old vow, let the spirit wake gently, now included humidity sensors. Technology didn't replace reverence, it stabilized it. When a batch sang, brewers still bowed, because science and gratitude aren't mutually exclusive in languages spoken by yeast. Abroad, sake left home and learned to introduce itself without a translator. It sat beside sushi, then strayed bravely to oysters, tacos, and quiet reading nights. Western bars chilled it until it pretended to be shy champagne. Japanese bartenders smiled politely and kept pouring at the temperature that tastes like truth. Export didn't dilute identity, it widened the table. That's what you want from survival. Not purity, but hospitality. Even ghosts adapted. Breweries keep altars. Restaurants still save first pours for absent friends. Salarymen stumble with better lighting, but the apology to the sidewalk remains classic. On summer nights, rivers host lanterns again, and somewhere a child watches, reflections tremble, learning the word obon the same night he learns his grandparents' names. Continuity wears LEDs now, but it still fits. Modern warnings arrived with quieter voices. Drink less, taste more, celebrate, don't medicate. Public campaigns replaced shame with suggestion, and izakaya menus discovered water. A good host now refills your cup and your pause. Balance returned, not as samurai law, but as urban wisdom. The best intoxication is borrowed, not owned, returned before midnight with thanks. So here you sit, in a city that forgot how to be quiet and remembers every evening at 7. The server places a small ceramic cup in your hand. Steam rises like a patient idea. You smell rice and river, and something you can't name that sounds like home. The sip is warm without hurry, modern without costume, old without effort. It does what it's always done. It asks you to be here, kindly, for one more moment. Outside, the alley glows damp and affectionate. Shoes splash, laughter edits itself to fit doorways. You realize the story never belonged to samurai or clerks or monks or artists. It belonged to a temperature, a cup, a willingness to pour for another person before yourself. That custom survived reforms, wars, fashions, and jet lag, which is better than immortality because it tastes like choice. And when you set the empty cup down, the room exhales with you, a chorus as old as rice, as new as neon. Someone says kampai without audience. Someone else answers without thinking. History doesn't end. It refills. Sake nods, unchanged at the center of change, and the night, amused, continues its gentle work of making strangers honest. Topic 13. The women who poured the world awake. Steam rises, soft and perfumed, curling around a woman's hands as she lifts a wooden paddle. Her sleeves are rolled past the elbow. Her skin glows from the warmth of fermenting rice. The year is 1742, though it could be any year. In Japan, brewing was long considered a man's world, until the sake itself decided otherwise. You smell the sweetness of yeast, faint and alive, and understand why people said the rice listened better to a woman's voice. Long before factories, sake began in kitchens. Wives, widows, and daughters brewed small batches in clay pots beside the fire, guided by scent, not science. They watched the bubbles, touched the temperature with their wrists, and listened to the quiet fizz that meant the gods were awake. Their sake was soft, cloudy, and honest. It was called kuchikami zake, mouth-chewed sake, because love itself was the enzyme. When the Edo period's guilds forbade women from entering professional breweries, they adapted. Some brewed secretly under family names. Others turned to inns, selling warm cups to travelers. They weren't rebels, they were custodians of continuity. In a country that prized composure, rebellion often disguised itself as care. These women didn't fight the system. They fermented it slowly from within. The world called them onatoji, female master brewers. They used intuition where men used measurement, poetry where others used paperwork. "You must taste the silence," one wrote in her diary. "If the vat hums too loudly, the rice is lonely." That sounds mystical, but science later proved her right. Excessive vibration disturbs fermentation. Sometimes myth simply arrives early to its own facts. Their influence spread quietly. Brewers realized that the batches stirred by women aged smoother, stayed clearer, and sold faster. Shrines dedicated to sake began allowing women to pour offerings again. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, the drink cared only for harmony. Rice didn't respect gender, it respected gentleness. Yet, outside the brewery, women were still expected to serve, not sip. In tea houses, geisha poured for guests who rarely met their eyes. But behind those poised smiles, many had once brewed for survival. The act of pouring wasn't submission, it was memory disguised as grace. Each refill whispered, "I know what warmth means." Some stories survive in sake folklore. A widow who saved her dying village by brewing from snowmelt. Another who discovered a yeast strain still used today. Their names are footnotes in books written by men who never lifted a paddle. But if you ask modern brewers where they learned patience, they'll mention their mothers. Tradition, after all, is usually maternal. When industrialization arrived, machines replaced muscle, but not instinct. Women returned to breweries as scientists, tasters, and business owners. The yeast still obeyed the same laws of temperature and tenderness. Fermentation, one brewer said recently, is motherhood at a molecular level. Today, half the award-winning sake in Japan is brewed or co-brewed by women. They don't call it revenge, they call it balance restored. Their hands, still warm from centuries of invisible work, guide modern tanks that hum like contented children. And somewhere deep inside that sound, the rice still remembers its first lullaby. So when you sip sake now, clear, fragrant, alive, you're tasting centuries of hands that refused to let the warmth go out. You may not know their names, but the drink does. It sings them softly, in bubbles that break like whispered applause. Topic 14. The silence between cups. Every culture drinks differently, but only Japan learned how to listen while doing it. You can feel it, at the way quiet fills a room before the first pour, as if everyone's waiting for permission to breathe. The silence isn't awkward, it's respectful, an agreement that warmth deserves stillness. In Edo taverns, people didn't talk over each other, conversation followed rhythm. Pour, sip, speak, pause. The pause mattered most. It gave words somewhere to land. The Japanese called it ma, the space between sounds, the heartbeat between moments. Drinking was never about filling the cup. It was about honoring the space it created. That silence did strange things. It made truths sound less sharp. Apologies became shorter, but heavier. "I'm sorry," said over sake, was more than language, it was surrender. To drink together after conflict was to declare the fight concluded, even if no one said it. In that way, alcohol repaired what words often damaged. For samurai, silence was sacred. It separated composure from chaos. Drinking too loudly was a disgrace, too quietly, a confession. The ideal was somewhere in between, a murmur of gratitude without need for wit. Noise is for men without thoughts, one retainer wrote. Warmth speaks on its own. Among lovers, silence carried a different flavor. The sound of two cups meeting was the only dialogue needed. After the first sip, a small sigh would fill the air, half pleasure, half relief. That sigh, poets said, was where love lived. If words are waves, silence is the tide that carries them unseen. Even the design of sake cups encouraged quiet. Their round lips invited slow sips. Their fragility discouraged gestures. You couldn't slam a sakazuki down in triumph. You'd break it. The vessel itself demanded calm hands and slower tempers. You learned to let pride cool before refilling. This reverence extended to nature. People drank facing gardens, rivers, or walls painted with cranes in flight. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was a mirror polished enough for reflection. Sake wasn't there to distract you from life, but to help you notice it, one soft degree at a time. The etiquette of pouring also relied on wordless understanding. You watched for your companion's cup to empty, refilling before they asked. That anticipation, awareness without announcement, became a language more elegant than speech. It's why Japanese drinking rarely feels wild. Even chaos has choreography. Modern bars forgot some of this quiet. Music hums, neon blinks, conversations collide. But late at night, when only a few cups remain, the hush returns naturally. Even strangers fall into rhythm. The ancient pattern re-emerges. Pour, sip, pause, remember. For a moment, Tokyo and Edo are the same city again. The silence between cups is where history hides. You feel it now, the weight of centuries resting softly in your chest. Each drink retells an old story. How humans learned to share warmth without stealing it. How connection requires pauses, not speeches. And when you finally set your cup down, the sound it makes, the tiny porcelain kiss against wood, is the gentlest proof that silence, too, can speak fluently. Topic 15. Ceremonies of Warmth. When the gods were invited to drink, the morning mist hangs low over the fields, soft as breath. From a distance, you can hear the faint rhythm of drums and the deep murmur of voices chanting in unison. This is not a party. It is a prayer that happens to include a bottle. In Japan, the sacred and the ordinary have never been rivals. They're housemates who share the same table. At Shinto shrines, priests pour sake before the kami, spirits of wind, stone, river, and rice. The liquid gleams in wooden cups, pure and pale as new light. The offering is called miki, literally God wine. It's believed to purify not just the altar, but the hearts of those watching. When the priests lift the cups, they do it slowly, like tuning an invisible string between heaven and earth. Sake in ritual form always faced east, toward the rising sun. The first sip belonged to Amaterasu, the goddess of light, the next to the harvest gods, the third to the ancestors who never left. Participants drank last, not to claim divinity, but to prove they could handle sharing space with it. To drink after the gods was a test of humility and, perhaps, courage. During weddings, 3 cups were used, each smaller than the last. The couple took 3 sips from each, 9 in total. symbolizing the slow merging of two separate lives into one rhythm. Guests watched in silence, understanding that the moment wasn't about happiness, but endurance. Sake didn't promise joy, it promised continuity. The same liquid appeared again at funerals. Families poured sake over the casket or left it beside the grave. It was both farewell and provision for the road ahead. In Japan, even the dead travel thirsty. The warm cup placed near incense smoke was a way of saying, rest, but don't feel forgotten. Sake was also medicine. Before the modern era, priests brewed versions mixed with herbs, honey, or crushed plums. They used it to treat fever, childbirth pain, and loneliness, because all three were considered spiritual imbalances. The body, one healer wrote, forgets itself when warmed. That phrase might have been intended medically, but it could just as easily describe the human condition. Every new year, households made otoso, a spiced sake shared among family members in strict order of age. The youngest drank first to pull luck forward, the eldest drank last to seal it in. The taste was sharp and fragrant, cinnamon and ginseng and gratitude. It was said to chase away evil and, more importantly, silence regret. On the first sunrise of the year, people still lift cups to the horizon and whisper thanks. They don't shout, they breathe it. In that breath, you can sense the through line of centuries. Rice, warmth, patience, reverence. Japan's prayers are never loud, they are poured. Even now, at rural shrines, you can find unlabeled bottles resting under trees, offerings left for invisible company. Some are half empty, some refilled by strangers. No one steals them. To drink what was meant for the gods is to invite their hangover, a curse not of pain, but of endless remembering. When you see those bottles in the morning fog, the glass beaded with dew, you understand something subtle but profound. Divinity, in Japan, never demanded perfection, only presence. And maybe that's why the gods keep drinking with us. Topic 16. The Farewell Cup. The room is nearly dark, just one candle left. A small group sits around a low table, the kind that forces closeness. No one speaks loudly. There's only the faint clink of porcelain and the sound of rain outside. Someone is leaving. Maybe a soldier. Maybe a son. Maybe just a friend moving to another town. The farewell cup, or wakare no sake, is ready. In Japan, goodbyes were never shouted across platforms. They were whispered into warmth. The custom of sharing a final drink before parting began in the Heian court, where nobles toasted journeys with restraint that felt like denial. To show sadness was impolite, to drink was acceptable. Sake absorbed the emotion words couldn't carry. The drink wasn't celebratory, it was medicinal, meant to dull the ache of separation. People would pour slowly, take a single sip, then look away, as if direct eye contact might make the leaving harder to survive. Some used the moment to confess things unsaid. Others simply sat in silence, trusting that shared warmth would do the talking. Writers loved these moments. In Edo plays, the farewell drink appears so often it's practically a character. Lovers doomed by circumstance share a small cup before parting. One says, "Drink quickly before it cools." The other answers, "Let it cool, I can't." The audience knew exactly what that meant. In Japan, even temperature carries emotion. Samurai, too, had their own farewell rituals. Before a dangerous mission, a comrade would pour for the departing man. The words were always the same. Return warm. It meant alive, but also unchanged, a hope both tender and impossible. The cup would be placed upside down afterward, never used again. It became a small tombstone of porcelain, a memory that didn't need burial. In villages, farewell cups were shared before fishermen went to sea or farmers joined pilgrimages. Sometimes they came back, sometimes only the cup did. The returning cup was washed in salt water and kept near the hearth. Families believed that, as long as the cup remained unbroken, the person's spirit could find its way home. At modern train stations, vending machines now sell canned sake. Travelers still raise them quietly before boarding, tapping the aluminum rim against their ticket. It's the same ritual, just disguised as convenience. The rice doesn't care about packaging. The warmth finds its way through metal, too. There's something haunting about the act itself, the way humans everywhere turn parting into ceremony, as if ritual can soften loss. Japan just perfected it. By containing heartbreak in something as small as a cup, it made pain portable, gentle, almost elegant. Old proverbs warn that unfinished cups invite unfinished goodbyes. That's why people always drank to the bottom, no matter how small the sip. Leaving anything behind would mean longing might follow. In a culture that values clean endings, even sorrow must be tidy. When the table finally empties and the rain quiets, the candle flickers out by itself. Someone exhales. The last cup cools, unrefilled, but its warmth remains in the air. The ghost of connection, he's still breathing. And though farewells never stop hurting, the Japanese way reminds you that maybe they're not meant to. Maybe love, distilled properly, should always taste a little like leaving. Topic 17. The morning after the storm. The first light creeps across the tatami like a slow confession. The air smells of rain, rice, and something faintly metallic. The ghost of a long night. You can hear the faint clatter of someone sweeping outside, the soft rhythm of bristles on stone. It's not guilt that wakes you exactly, but gravity reclaiming its authority. In Japan, even hangovers feel polite. In Edo times, mornings after festivals were strangely beautiful. Streets glimmered with spilled sake, lantern wax, and half-crushed chrysanthemums. People stepped carefully, as if walking through memory. Vendors reheated leftover noodles. Priests washed altars with cold water, whispering thanks for the chaos now sleeping in gutters. The country, briefly drunk on itself, sobered in unison. There was a drink for this state, kudamizu, literally cooling water. Made from cold rice porridge thinned with tea, it was said to calm the sun inside. The cure wasn't to erase the intoxication, but to domesticate it, turning last night's wildness into something you could live with. In Japan, balance was always the preferred punishment. Fishermen believed that after drinking, the sea became jealous. They wouldn't sail until they'd offered sake back to the water, pouring it gently from the bow. The ripples carried apology and partnership, a reminder that no intoxication is free. The ocean, patient and hungover itself, usually forgave them by noon. Writers found poetry in this tenderness. Drunk last night, alive this morning, one poet wrote. The gods have a sense of humor. In those small hangovers, people saw proof of divine restraint. The idea that pleasure could visit but not stay. It's an oddly merciful worldview, especially compared to cultures that treat guilt as rent for joy. The samurai viewed the morning after as moral inventory. A warrior who could drink and still rise before dawn was considered disciplined. One who slept past sunrise was judged to have surrendered to weakness. The difference wasn't moral, just aesthetic, a quiet contest between elegance and excess. Reputation, like sake, depended on temperature. Commoners, meanwhile, treated the hangover as communal comedy. Neighbors exchanged knowing looks at wells and bathhouses. Someone always claimed they'd been possessed by a wine fox, a mischievous spirit that made you sing and overspend. The cure, naturally, was to feed the fox. Leftover rice wrapped in seaweed and a promise not to repeat the crime until next festival. Inside homes, wives made miso soup, strong enough to smell like forgiveness. Husbands pretended they'd forgotten the song they sang at midnight. Children found coins under the table and asked if gods left them. The adults said yes, because explaining hangovers to a child would require theology. By midday, the town returned to rhythm. Merchants called out prices again. Crows argued on rooftops. The world moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet under the calm, something lingered, a warmth, a subtle reminder that even indulgence can be sacred if followed by reflection. That's how Japan handled pleasure. Not by rejecting it, but by teaching it manners. Even the worst hangover was part of a larger cycle: feast, regret, gratitude, repeat. Civilization at its core might just be a well-managed morning after. And so when you sip water from a bamboo cup at dawn and taste a faint echo of last night's sweetness, you're not just rehydrating. You're participating in a ritual that began when rice first learned how to sing. Topic 18. The spirit that never slept. Night returns, but differently now, slower, wiser. Lanterns sway over quiet streets. The same drink that once loosened laughter now deepens silence. Sake was never just a liquid, it was a lens. Through it, people saw their lives with softer edges. Through it, the past looked less cruel, and the future less far away. In ancient Japan, it was believed that spirits never slept. Human rest was tolerated only because the gods wanted solitude for a few hours. Drinking, then, became a way of borrowing divine wakefulness, a temporary entry into the unseen. That's why people left cups half full overnight for the spirits to finish. Sharing with ghosts was good manners. There was a belief that every cup of sake contained a memory. The first sip woke the past, the second rewrote it. The third one forgave it. By the fourth, you were no longer drinking. You were negotiating peace with yourself. That's why old poets said, sake warms twice, once in the stomach, once in the soul. Temples brewed their own batches to maintain a balance between holiness and humanity. Priests drank not to escape, but to remind themselves that even divinity benefits from humility. We drink, one monk wrote, so that we don't forget the taste of imperfection. You can almost hear him smile between the lines. During winter festivals, villagers lit torches along the snow-lined streets, each carrying a flask wrapped in cloth. They said the sake kept the cold from sneaking into the bones. Children followed, holding paper lanterns shaped like foxes. The air smelled of cedar and steam, of laughter and loss, the dual perfumes of being alive. The night often ended with one bottle left unopened. It wasn't waste, it was faith. The bottle symbolized tomorrow, proof that warmth would return even if the fire dimmed. Every culture has its own definition of hope. In Japan, it's measured in milliliters. When dawn crept back, the priests poured the remaining sake into the ground as an offering. The soil drank first. Life, they believed, ran on reciprocity. You take from the earth, you give back warmth. Even the act of spilling was sacred. That's why every Japanese toast begins not with cheers, but with kanpai. Empty the cup. It's not a command to drink, but an invitation to completeness. In the end, what remained wasn't intoxication, but intimacy, a sense that the boundary between human and divine had briefly dissolved. Sake was never about escape. It was about remembering what already connects us: warmth, imperfection, and the endless cycle of pouring and receiving. And as the last lantern flickers out and the city exhales into sleep, you realize the spirit of sake never rests because it doesn't need to. It lives in the hands that pour, the hearts that share, the pauses between laughter. It is the memory of every night that ended softly, and every morning that began again. Somewhere, a bottle waits unopened. Somewhere, a rice field breathes under the moon. And somewhere, you, eyes half closed, heart half warm, understand that getting wasted was never really about losing control. It was about remembering, gently, that you were never alone to begin with. Topic 1: When the lanterns. Dim the night folds over the city like a silk robe, thin and quiet. You hear the faint rustle of bamboo blinds, the soft hum of a distant shamisen, and the tender crack of cooling wood. The sake jars are empty now, but their warmth lingers, woven into the air like an invisible thread. You breathe in rice and smoke and something that feels like memory. This is not intoxication anymore. It's the afterglow of companionship. In the small hours, Japan changes tempo. Streets that once echoed with merchants and laughter now whisper. Paper lanterns swing gently, their light trembling like the last pulse of a heartbeat. You notice how even the shadows behave politely, keeping to their corners. The wind moves like someone walking barefoot through a sleeping house. It smells faintly of ash and steamed cedar. Inside, a single candle finishes its duty. Wax pools, flame sighs, and the room exhales. Cups are stacked neatly beside the hearth. Each one has seen countless hands, hands that trembled, laughed, prayed. The clay remembers them all, the way old temples remember every footstep that ever dared to enter. You wonder if, in some small way, every vessel is alive, filled once with warmth, now with story. The sake itself may be gone, but its ghost remains. You can almost hear it, a faint fizz, a memory of laughter caught in a bottle that forgot to close. There's a beauty in that absence, like snow after footprints fade, or letters where ink has outlived meaning. The emptiness is what makes the memory visible. Somewhere nearby, a cat jumps onto a windowsill, shaking the dust from centuries. It blinks into the quiet, perfectly sober, perfectly indifferent. You envy it a little, that graceful ability to exist without needing reason. In a world obsessed with meaning, the cat is the closest thing to enlightenment. Outside, an innkeeper sweeps the entrance, his broom tapping gently against the stone. The gesture is old, almost sacred. He's not cleaning for guests, he's cleaning for the morning, for the light that hasn't yet arrived. There's something tender about the way he hums, a song without melody, offered to no one in particular. You think about the people who once sat here, monks, poets, lovers, travelers, all warmed by the same rice, the same fermentation, the same brief escape. Their lives are gone, but the warmth they traded remains like perfume in an old sleeve. Maybe that's what culture really is, shared heat, passed down through centuries of cups. The candle finally dies, leaving the room draped in soft grey. Your eyes adjust, tracing outlines that memory completes. The silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels kind. It wraps around you the way steam wraps around a bowl of miso, invisible but nourishing. There's a reason the Japanese word for drunk can also mean possessed. It's not about madness. It's about being briefly inhabited by something bigger than yourself. Laughter, music, company, peace. And when it leaves, it does so gently, bowing before the door closes. The old poets understood this. They called sake liquid impermanence, a reminder that nothing, not even warmth, is meant to stay. You sip, you smile, you sleep. Everything else is ceremony. Outside, the last lantern flickers and goes out. Darkness folds itself neatly around the town, like a kimono being put away. And in that hush, the world seems to whisper a single, patient truth, that everything sacred begins by being shared. Topic 2, Dreams of the Rice Spirit. You lie down, the futon soft beneath your palms. The air still carries the faint sweetness of steamed rice and cooled sake. It's a scent that belongs to both the kitchen and the shrine, domestic and divine at once. Outside, rain begins to fall with the rhythm of an old lullaby. It sounds like conversation in another room, too quiet to interrupt. There was once a belief that rice contained a spirit called Inari, who blessed those who treated it kindly. People left offerings of sake so the rice spirit would stay pleased, a gentle bribe for another good harvest. It's comforting to think that gratitude could be brewed, poured, and shared. That divinity could live in something so simple, so warm. As the rain deepens, your mind wanders to the fields where it all began. You see farmers knee-deep in water, bending gracefully, planting one seedling at a time. Their hats shine with rain. Their feet sink into soft mud that smells of life itself. This quiet labor, repeated for generations, is the first chapter of every cup ever poured. When autumn arrived, the fields turned golden, and the same farmers bowed again, not in exhaustion, but in thanks. The first sack brewed from that rice wasn't for drinking, it was for the gods. Only after the spirits had their fill would humans taste the rest. A nation built on gratitude learned to toast the unseen before the living. You imagine the fermenting vats bubbling in dark wooden rooms. The sound is faint, steady, alive, the earth's heartbeat slowed to human pace. You realize that fermentation is patience made visible. Every bubble is a breath that has waited 1,000 years to reach your cup. In the quiet of your own room, that same warmth still hums. You think about how all intoxication, whether from love, music, or rice, begins as transformation. The raw becomes refined. The harsh becomes tender. Even people ferment, given enough time and warmth. You turn slightly, feeling the futon yield beneath you, soft as memory. The rain outside shifts to drizzle, the kind that blurs the edge between waking and dream. In that in-between, you almost hear whispers, not words, just the sigh of centuries cooling on the wind. There's comfort in knowing that something as fragile as rice can endure through storms, wars, and time itself, still offering warmth, still teaching humans how to soften. You wonder if that's the real reason sake exists, not to numb life, but to remind us it can still taste gentle. As your breathing slows, you picture the rice fields under moonlight, each droplet of water catching a reflection of the sky. Thousands of tiny mirrors holding stars hostage for a single night. You think, Maybe that's what intoxication truly is. Seeing the universe reflected in something you made with your own hands, your eyelids grow heavier. The line between thought and dream dissolves. You feel the warmth of countless cups passed through countless generations, settling somewhere behind your ribs. It doesn't burn, it glows. And before sleep claims you entirely, you understand one final thing. The spirit of sake doesn't live in bottles or temples. It lives wherever patience meets gratitude, in hands that pour slowly, in hearts that remember to say thank you, even to rice. Topic 3. The breath of the night. The night has stopped pretending to move. Even the wind seems to rest between its own sighs. You can hear the faint drip of water from a distant eave, the kind of sound that happens only when the world has decided to listen to itself. The air carries the cool scent of cedar and smoke, faintly sweet, faintly alive. Somewhere, a cricket dares one last note, a tiny act of courage in an ocean of quiet. Inside your mind, the warmth of sack lingers like a candle under glass. It no longer burns. It glows softly, the way memory glows after regret has already forgiven it. You can feel it tracing small circles beneath your skin, slow and patient, like hands wringing out the last ache of the day. This is what peace tastes like. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. In old villages, people believed that at midnight the world inhaled. Roots, trees, rivers. Everything paused to take one long, shared breath. To stay awake during that inhale was considered good luck. If you breathe with the night, they said, you will dream kindly. You don't know whether that's true, but you try it anyway. You inhale. The air is cool, forgiving. You exhale. The past leaves quietly. The sake's warmth is now memory's rhythm. A reminder that your body, like rice, is mostly patience and water. You think of the farmers, the brewers, the priests, all long gone, all somehow here. Every generation exhaled warmth into the next until it reached you. Maybe we never really own comfort. Maybe we only borrow it, hold it gently for a night, and pass it along. The candle's scent is faint now. Old wax, charcoal, faint citrus from the sleeve of someone who once leaned too close. It's strange how even the smallest details hold stories. The world, it seems, is made of leftovers. Warmth that didn't cool. Light that didn't fade. Breaths that forgot to stop. You smile at that thought, the way one smiles at the punchline of a dream. The futon sighs as you shift. The air folds itself around you, weightless and kind. Somewhere in the distance, a wooden door slides shut with a sound like punctuation. Soft, final, honest. Everything in this moment belongs exactly where it is. For the first time tonight, you feel no desire to reach for anything. You remember a saying from an old monk when you stop wanting to sleep, sleep comes. You laugh quietly. He must have understood the mind the way brewers understand fermentation. You can't force warmth, you can only make room for it. So you let the silence rise like steam, filling every corner until it hums. If the gods are still awake, they must be watching kindly now, amused, perhaps, by how humans can turn even fatigue into ceremony. You imagine them sipping invisible sake, whispering to each other, they've learned to rest. And the stars outside blink in agreement, each one a tiny lantern hung in the night's great eve. Your breathing deepens. The edges of your thoughts blur, dissolving into rhythm. The world narrows to warmth, heartbeat, and distant rain. You realize that the line between waking and sleeping is as thin as rice paper, and equally easy to pass through if handled with care. And as your mind drifts further, you hear, or maybe imagine, the soft clink of two porcelain cups somewhere far away. No words, no toasts, just that sound. Delicate, complete. A conversation older than language. Topic: for when the world finally sleeps. Dawn is still far away, but the night feels satisfied. The air hums like something finished yet infinite, a song that has forgotten its own beginning. The sake's warmth has settled into your chest like a quiet tenant, asking for nothing, promising only calm. You no longer feel separate from the room, or the rain, or the breath between heartbeats. Everything is one temperature. Outside, the rain slows, falling in polite intervals. A single droplet slides down the shoji paper screen, leaving a glistening trail before disappearing into silence. That's how time behaves when you're almost asleep, visible just long enough to remind you it exists. The faint scent of tatami, wood, and night air becomes a blanket heavier than gravity. You think of the thousands of nights like this that came before you, farmers sleeping beside empty fields, monks resting after chants that reached no one and everyone, lovers in forgotten inns, still warm from laughter. They all breathed the same air, trusted the same quiet. You are not their descendant, you are their continuation. In Japan, people used to say the world sleeps differently depending on who listens to it. For some, it snores like the sea. For others, it whispers like rice boiling on low flame. Tonight, the world sleeps through you. Each exhale you release becomes a lullaby for something unseen. Maybe that's why dreams feel shared, because, in a way, they are. You feel the futon beneath you, the pillow cool against your cheek, the faint tremor of your pulse sinking with the rain. Your mind slows until even thought seems too heavy to lift. You don't resist, you let it sink. The warmth inside you softens into something vast. Not yours, not anyone's. It's the same warmth that once filled ancient cups, that traveled from hands to hands, hearts to hearts, centuries to centuries. It's the proof that humanity's oldest comfort was never language, or shelter, or even love. It was sharing heat in the dark. You imagine a cup being poured somewhere beyond sight, perhaps on another continent, another time. The sound is the same. The warmth, too. It doesn't matter who holds it. The act itself is immortal. The rain stops. The silence that follows is total, like the pause after a story ends, but before anyone remembers to applaud. That's where you are now, between endings and beginnings, wrapped in a silence that asks for nothing except rest. Your eyelids flutter once, twice, then surrender. The world grows soft around the edges. Thought folds into dream, dream into sleep. You drift, weightless, endless, full. Somewhere, faintly, the rice spirit smiles. The last warmth of the night slides through your veins, slow as gratitude. And in that final whisper before sleep, the world seems to exhale with you, perfectly still, perfectly content, perfectly complete. Conclusion. The last sip. You wake before dawn, not fully, just enough to feel the room breathing with you. The air is cool and still, scented faintly of rain and ash, as if the night left behind a signature before leaving. Somewhere outside, a rooster begins a hesitant call, the kind that sounds unsure whether the world is ready to begin again. It feels almost rude to answer. The sake from last night is gone. Only the cup remains, still warm from memory. You lift it gently, half expecting to feel the weight of centuries again. And in a way, you do. The clay hums softly against your fingers, holding echoes of laughter, prayer, and 1,000 tiny kindnesses that survived time's indifference. It doesn't matter that it's empty. Emptiness is what makes it eternal. Through the paper window, the first thread of light slides into the room. It doesn't rush, it just arrives, slow and sure, like forgiveness. The world outside smells of wet soil and cedar. Clean, reborn, undeservedly gentle. You understand now why the Japanese call dawn yoke when the night opens. It's not the darkness ending, it's the world unclenching. You think about the people who drank before you, monks in mountain temples, fishermen by the shore, samurai by campfires, clerks in neon alleys, all of them, in their own ways, chasing the same warmth, holding the same fragile comfort between fingers that trembled for different reasons. What joined them wasn't the drink, but the silence afterward, that shared acknowledgement that life is short, but sometimes beautifully so. Sake, you realize, was never about escape. It was about acceptance. It taught patience through fermentation, humility through ritual, connection through warmth. It asked for nothing extravagant, only that you pour for another before yourself, that you savor before forgetting, that you rest before beginning again. Outside, the temple bell rings once. The sound rolls through the mist like a slow heartbeat, dissolving into everything. For a moment, you feel it pass through you. Not loud, not commanding, just there. The same way peace is there, quietly waiting to be noticed. You smile at the thought that, somewhere, the rice fields are already awake again. Farmers bend in the dawn light, repeating motions older than memory. Their hands, damp with dew, hold seedlings that will one day become warmth in someone else's cup. The cycle never stops. And maybe that's the real miracle, not eternity, but continuation. The room brightens slightly, but you stay still, eyes half closed. The warmth in your chest has become something quieter now, not joy, not sorrow, just balance. The kind of peace that doesn't need applause, or meaning, or even a name. You realize this is how the mountain men survived their winters, how the monks endured silence, how the samurai faced death. With warmth shared and silence honored, you set the cup down and breathe slowly. The world outside begins its ordinary noises again. Birds, footsteps, a gate sliding open. Life continues, politely indifferent to the revelation you just had. But that's all right. The secret isn't meant to be shouted. It's meant to be carried like heat under your ribs. And as the light climbs the wall and settles across your face, you close your eyes once more. Somewhere deep inside, the last drop of warmth dissolves into gratitude. You feel it. Ancient, soft, human. The spirit that never slept, finally resting through you. The world exhales, and this time it sounds exactly like peace.